Good morning, all. Now we are going to start today's session. Before going to start session, it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Kaustubh Das. Dr. Kaustubh Das is presently Assistant Professor at Department of Physics, Jadavpur University. He is working in the field of nanomaterial synthesis for photo detection and gas sensing applications since last 10 years. He has done MSc Physics from Calcutta University, MTech in the solid state technology from IIT Kharagpur. He has completed his PhD from IIT Kharagpur and then joined as SNU National Center for Basic Sciences, Kolkata, as a scientist D, prior to join at Jadavpur University, Kolkata as an assistant professor. He has published more than 100 publications in conferences and journals, added his credit in his career. He has done a lot of experimental work and fabricated a lot of devices in this period. With this short introduction, I'd like to invite Dr. Das to take the charge of the session and transferring the screen to Dr. Das for his first talk on fundamental of device fabrication. I'm very much sure all of you will enjoy a lot from his talk. Please, Dr. Das. Thank you, Devasis. Thank you, Dr. Panda.
Though I admit that I am not very comfortable in giving lectures online because I cannot see the face of the participants. So everyone knows that obviously a conference or a seminar in front of the participant give us a special, you can say, interest of giving the talk or delivering the talk. But still, for the last 1 year, we are trying to cope up with this pandemic situation, and now a lot of online conference and talks are going on. So hope you will enjoy the talk. I have been told to give basically 3 lectures, and based on that, I have decided 3 topics, but under the same umbrella. You can say a common umbrella. And since the participants are from various groups, various fields, many of you are the teachers or the faculties, some of you may be research scholars, some postdocs. So I will not focus on my work. Obviously, that will not be very interesting to you, but I will try to give an overall view or a picture of how the device fabrications are done. Obviously, I cannot go into far details. I will try to have few points where I will emphasize and give a brief introduction today. So my introductory part will be today, which is on fundamental of device fabrication. I have choose the topic as a general viewpoint, and then I will proceed some of the details in the next 2 days when I will be giving the lectures. Okay, so I may start now.
Just sorry, I'm
Yes.
interrupting a little bit. Please give a break for 10 minutes. We will distribute the test question. Please let me know.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please continue.
So if we go to a brief history of the electronic device, we all know that in case of electronic device, the first device was a vacuum diode, and that was more or less invented in 1897 by Fleming. And from there onwards, after 50 years, we get the first transistor. And in 1948, we all know about William Shockley, who invented the junction transistor. So you can see that from vacuum diode to transistor, it takes nearly 50 years. But from then onwards, the progress was fast. After 10 years, in 1958, it was a, you can say, a mark to today's scenario, where it has started the IC, first IC in 1958 by Jack Kilby, who was working in Texas Instruments, where he put 2 transistors on a single piece of silicon, and that is considered to be the first IC, because the concept of IC is to have various components in a single piece, and that was the first one in 1958. And obviously from then onwards the progress started. Now if we see the time progress of the device size, then you can see a drastic reduction in the size. whether in our childhood we have seen computers, but the computers normally take lot of space in a computer lab, and there are workstations which take a huge room for that. But now, whenever at this stage, you have seen now everyone is having a laptop or at least a smartphone, and the functionality of these smartphone and laptop are far better than the workstation or the computers at that time. So you obviously understand that how that progress has been done from the first IC to the present scenario. And this everything, whatever the shrinkage in size or the advancement in the device quality has been possible because the IC progress, because of the progress in the IC. Now, the question is, whenever we talk about size reduction, the device people talk or normally think of Moore's law. Now, what is Moore's law? First of all, this is not actually a law. What we know about physics law or some other scientific laws, this is actually not a law, but device people or the industry people use this term Moore's law. Now, who is this Moore? As you can see the picture, he is the Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder of the Intel. Now, he actually published one paper where he drew a line passing through 5 points. What are those 5 points? The 5 points represent number of components per IC where the uh, thing was decided that the minimum cost will be for the development of the each component of the IC. That means you can have IC, number of ICs in a single chip, but you have to consider the cost also whenever you are going for an industrial or commercialization, because you cannot have a commercial thing with which can be too costly to fabricate. So he actually used 5 points where the IC with minimum cost per component was considered, and number of components per IC was actually taken from 1959 to 64. So for these 5 years, number of components per IC was taken, and then a plot was done. Now he find a straight line, and then he extrapolate that up to 1975. So when he extrapolate, he found and predict that the number of components per IC or a per chip will be around 65,000, will be around 65,000 in 1975. So that was his prediction, and this prediction was later on carried over for years and thought to be as a law by the industry people. And more or less, according to this slope of the line, it was found that he predict that the number of components will be doubled every month, every 12 months or every year, basically. So that was more or less found to be valid till, you can say, 2018-19. But now the industry experts say that this law cannot be valid further, because this is now going to be impossible to implement this doubling rate at this stage, because industry is now going to a saturation point. You cannot have more density, or you can say more size reduction at the rate at what Moore has predicted. But at least till 2018 or 19, whatever you can say, this law was more or less matching with the result of the industry commercial products that has been obtained till now. So this is a very popular graph which I have shown here. If you attend the lectures where the device people give, you will see this graph always, and the statement of the Moore's law. Okay. Now, if we go to the worldwide situation about the IC industry, you can see the share of the industry where IC Fab Labs are there, and you can see that Taiwan is leading. Taiwan has nearly 24% of the share of the Fab Labs, followed by China, South Korea, and Singapore, Malaysia, Japan. That means more or less these Asian countries are dominating in this part. Obviously, USA is one of the pioneer in this field, but now the Asian countries are dominating. You will not see the name of India because India doesn't have that facility. Only two Fab Labs are there in India. One is the SCL in Chandigarh, where silicon wafers are produced, but only for the R&D section, not for commercial part. And another, there is Sitar in Bangalore, I think. It is in Bangalore. It is a DRDO lab. So only these two Fab Labs are there in India. But otherwise, normally this IC industry is concentrated within these few countries only. It is not in the vast majority of the country, but only concentrated within this. And now Asian countries are leading the market. That is what you can see. If you see the picture anywhere, you can search and find that it is this situation right now. Okay, now we are always talking of IC and IC. So what is IC? IC obviously is an abbreviation. IC is basically integrated chip. Now, the main concept of this integrated chip is that you are having electronic components in a single chip of a semiconducting material. And electronic components means you are having active components like transistor, diodes, uh, FET, and so on, and also components like resistance, and more or less interconnects like wiring and all those things, all in a single chip. That is the main idea of IC. So this is the thing. And why should one go for IC? Now the question is, why should we are having ICs nowadays? What is the benefit of having an IC? Now, obviously, as I have shown earlier, that there is a progress where we have come down to a smartphone, where which I can held in a hand and do whatever I can do. I can obviously talk and take photograph. That is a separate thing. But apart from that, it can work like a computer also. You can write, you can search internet, and you can do anything you want now. So that is in a single mobile phone or a smartphone which you carry in your pocket or in your hand. And that is possible of this integrated circuit. Now, integrated circuit basically reduce the size, and with the reduction of the size, the main advantage is very low power consumption. And as the power consumption reduces, it always helps in a lot of industrial application and obviously commercial application. Moreover, as the total thing has shrinked, the operation speed has increased enormously, because you don't have wirings, you don't have shoulder joints. So all this you can remove in an integrated circuit. And as these are not there, there are reliability of this circuit has increased a lot. The operational speed has increased enormously. uh, Obviously you can avoid thermal heat generation or thermal problems. It is suitable for small signal operation. And moreover, since this is a batch process, it also reduces the cost of manufacturing, though the total manufacturing thing is a huge part, obviously. But since this is a batch process, that means you can produce lot of ICs in a single process. The cost automatically reduces. So all these thing has caused us to go for an IC. So obviously more reliability, high speed, or you can say ultra high speed, and very small package or a size. That means you can carry a very small sensor in a small pointer like thing. You can have all the facilities inside a small mobile phone or a smartphone. So this is why everyone has gone for IC in the last few years. Okay. Now, if we go back again, our transistor was invented in 1947-48 time, and followed by some other components during 1950-51. Now, all these were obviously discrete components. Now, in 1958, as we have seen that the first IC was developed, and during that era, that means in the 1960s to 1970s, you can say the number of components in a single chip was around 10. And this type of integration was termed as small scale integration, or in short, it is SSI. Now, obviously, as time progresses, the number of components in a single chip starts increasing, and we go to MSI, that is medium scale integration, then large scale integration, LSI. And during our childhood, during 1980 to 1990, then comes, you can say, VLSI, which is very large scale integration. And what do you mean by large scale integration? Obviously, you can see that you are having more or less 10 lakh, up to 10 lakh transistors or components within a single chip. So that was a huge jump during that time. And VLSI actually caused a lot of progress in the IC industry. And whatever you can see nowadays is beginning has occurred during that time. And then obviously again comes the ULSI, or the ultra large scale integration, and GSI, which is at the present day on what is going on, which is giant scale integration. So these are the different integration levels, and you will see, if you ever come in contact with industry people, you will hear the words VLSI, ULSI, LSI, and all these terms. Actually, the meaning of these terms are this one. That means these actually denote the integration levels, or the number of components that can be integrated within a single chip. Okay. Now, if we go for a manufacturing part, so there are various steps to do the manufacturing. First, obviously, you have to have a design. Without a design, without an idea or a plan, you cannot go forward. So obviously, the starting should be a design. Then there should be a wafer preparation. I will come what is a wafer and what is wafer preparation. Then after that, there will be some processing. Then lithography. I will also cover this lithography part in my next two lectures. Apart from that, that means lithography actually gives you the patterning. And then after lithography, you will have etching, then cleaning, then thin film deposition, ion implantation, and so on. And finally, you will get the testing of the IC that has been fabricated, and obviously the assembly and packaging, because what you get is a packaged product. Okay, so that will be the last one after the testing, and it passed the test. So this is more or less a flow chart that is covered up whenever a manufacturing is done for an IC. Now, I hope thin film and other parts will be covered up, like ion implantation and so, but I will, today I will talk a bit about wafer part, what is a wafer and how they are prepared or cleaned and so on. Lithography, as I told, I will cover in the next two talks. I hope the other part, like important part like thin film deposition, will be covered up in some other days. Okay. So as I have told that whenever you go for a fabrication, the thing that is very important are wafer manufacturing. You need lithography, you need deposition and etching, and another part obviously a lab, which is a clean room. Okay, so these are the, you can say, four major requirement of a fabrication process. So I will, as I have told that I will talk about the wafer now. What is a wafer is basically a thin slice of a semiconductor. Wafer are normally a thin slice of a semiconductor, and it is the starting material. In any IC industry, it is the starting material, and after a long process, that the flowchart I have shown, after the long process, you get the end product. So this is a very important part. A wafer is a very important material in any IC industry. Without a wafer, you cannot go to the IC. So it has to be the starting material. So you cannot start the work without an silicon wafer. So I think some of you have seen how a silicon wafer looks like, and those who haven't seen can see actually it looks like this, the top one. And after the IC fabrication, obviously it comes out to be the one which is shown below. Okay. Now the question is, why the IC industry or the industry people still working with silicon? Why silicon wafers? Why we always buy silicon wafers when we make an integrated circuit? The answer is that actually other wafers are also available, like germanium, gallium arsenide, indium phosphide, gallium aluminium arsenide, and so on. But when you are trying to commercialize anything, you have to keep in mind of the cost and obviously the availability of the starting material. Now, if you take these two into criteria, and obviously other advantages like advantage of having native oxide on silicon, uh, then more or less higher mobility and so on, you can have to have silicon till date, because it is the basic abundant element of on earth, and nearly 27.7% of the earth crust is made up of silicon, and the main ingredient is found in sand. So obviously you can understand why silicon is so popular in the IC industry. Only drawback of silicon is that its optical property is not up to the mark, because it is an indirect bandgap semiconductor, and that's why photonic people try to find out different type of material for their application, but still in the IC industry, silicon is the dominant. So though for LED and other purposes, some of the material like gallium nitride, gallium arsenide has been used, but in case of IC part, the basic material is still silicon. Okay. Now, how these wafers are produced? Because you have to produce an wafer. So how it is produced? Okay. As I have told you, that you can fetch it up from the earth's crust, and then you have to have the bulk silicon from it. Okay. Now, bulk silicon obviously will be like uh, just bulk materials, but that those are not wafers. So you have to do some processing to obtain the polished wafers. Now, just I am showing one slide where you can see some of the step how a ingot or a silicon wafer ingot is produced. Now, what is an ingot? Ingot is basically a single crystal chunk of a silicon. Okay. Now, you initially have silicon bulk material, and it will be placed in a crucible, and if you heat it up, you will get the liquid silicon. Now, you can see the picture A, where you have the silicon bulk material in the crucible, and then by resistive heating or RF heating, whatever, you can heat the silicon to a molten form inside the crucible. And then what you have to do, you have to insert a seed crystal and then slowly withdraw it. Okay, now whenever you slowly withdraw it, due to the temperature gradient, it start hardening up, and it forms a solid cylinder type of silicon. Okay, this method actually was named after the Polish scientist, and he developed method.
Kostubda, your voice is not coming. I think sir is facing network issue. Please. Yeah, Kostubda, your please share your slide once again. Yeah. Fine.
Okay, I think there was a technical problem. I was
It's
not,
fine.
yeah. So I didn't know where I have missed the thing.
Yeah, you just start from the whatever discussing about this molten part. You just start from this slide only. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Everyone can hear now?
Yes, yeah, now we can hear. Please go to first,
No.
next slide. Next slide. Next slide.
Okay. So this slide I was there, no?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next
Yeah,
slide. Okay.
yeah, this one.
From this one.
Wafer
Okay.
production.
Uh,
Half of
okay.
this slide. Means you already
Okay,
discussed
half
already
of this
figure
one.
A, B, start
Okay,
from
fine. So I just repeat once because
yeah. That's good.
the thing I had stopped because of the net problem. So what I was telling, that whenever you have to make a silicon wafer, your starting point is basically some silicon chunks what you have. Now from silicon chunks to wafer, you have to go for some process, and the first process what you have to do is the ingot growth. Actually, what an ingot is a silicon single crystal cylinder thing from where you have to cut the silicon wafers. So first you have to make the ingot, and there are basically two processes for this preparation of the ingot. One is CZ method, which is named after Polish scientist who developed it in 1916, and another method is called flat zone method. So I just showing you the CZ method, which is the most popular one. And in this method, you place the chunks in a crucible, you heat it up, and obviously after heating it melts. Now you have to have a seed crystal, you have to insert it in this molten silicon, and then you slowly withdraw it. When you slowly withdraw it, due to the temperature gradient, the thing will uh, start solidifying and form a cylinder type of thing. Now, obviously, that will take a cylinder with circular cross section, because we know that the uh, circular area will have the minimum energy. And that's why whenever we have silicon wafers, they are in the form of circles, not in the square shape. Obviously, you can have those squared if you dice it up. Okay. So these you have to do. That means you have to do, withdraw by slightly rotating the seed crystal as it is shown here in the figure B and figure C. And you can see in D, the thing is started solidifying, and in the E, you are getting the ingot or the cylinder of your desired length. Now, in order to have a desired diameter, you have to play with two things. One is the rate with which you are pulling, and you have to control the temperature profile. That means, obviously, to melt silicon, you have to give the sufficient heat to the crucible. But where you are pulling it out, you have to keep a temperature gradient, and that is also very crucial part. So one crucial part is the cooling rate, and another is the temperature profile, which will determine the crystal diameter. And what you will get is a ingot, which we call ingot, actually is a crystal, silicon crystal of cylindrical in shape. Okay. Now, obviously, you get a cylinder and you have to have silicon wafers. Now, you have seen the previous picture where a silicon wafer looks like. Obviously, the silicon wafer is a circular thing, but a thin slice circular wafer. Now, that means you have to slice this off. That means you are having an ingot, which is a basically a cylinder of a few centimeters in length. Now, you have to cut them up. Now, cutting is also done by two processes, one with diamond cutter, and another, which is most popular, is wire cutter. Actually, diamond cutter is having a problem that you have to throw the diamond cutter once used. So it is not very cost effective for doing the thing. Whereas for wire cutter, you can reuse it, and at a single process you can cut lot of lot of wafers from a single chunk or a single ingot. As you can see in the above picture, there are parallel wares which is cutting the ingot into several slices, and this process is called slicing. So you get basically a slice of silicon, which is still not a wafer, because you have to do some lapping. Okay. Before this slicing, another part you have to do, whenever you get an as grown ingot, the surface is rough and you exactly didn't get a desired diameter. So what you have to do, you have to ground the surface of the cylinder. This grinding of the surface of the cylinder makes the surface, you can say, less rough. Some of the defects can also be removed by grinding the surface, and also you get the desired diameter of the, you can say, the cylinder. Okay, so after that you do the slicing. That means you cut the ingot using wire cutter or diamond cutter, whatever you wish, and then you have to do the lapping. Lapping is basically a rough polishing, you can say, where you can see this picture. You have a plate where you have a slurry mixture, and over that you have to rotate the silicon wafer using, obviously not by hand, by using different rotators, and in parallel you can lap various wafers at the same time, and you achieve the desired thickness of the wafer as you wish. And these also reduce the roughness of the wafer faces a bit, and then final roughness has to be reduced to atomic scale. That means whenever you have a silicon wafer, you can see actually it as a mirror. You can see your face on a silicon wafer. That means it will be atomically thin, atomically fine. So it, roughness will in the level of atomic size, and that is done by the final polishing, and what you achieve is a silicon wafer, and then you obviously have to clean after this processing is done. So this is the whole process. So first process is ingot production from silicon chunks, and then after that grinding the surface of the cylinder, slicing into small chunks, then lapping it into desired thickness, final polishing and cleaning. So this is the whole process what you have to follow to get a silicon in a silicon industry. Okay, so you can see there are various ingots of various diameters, and according to those ingot diameter, you get your desired silicon wafers of various diameters. Now, if you see the evolution of your size of the silicon wafers, actually in 1970, the starting was a smaller one. It was around 2-inch diameter. Now, as progresses, because actually making an ingot of larger diameter is really a challenge. Now, initially the industry start to grow with a 2-inch, then they proceed with 3, 4, and so on. And as you can see, around 2000, you are getting 12-inch wafers also. Now, these 12-inch wafers are now commercially used. Okay, and again, there is a progress in the wafer diameter, and 18-inch diameter wafers can also be produced, but still they are in the R&D section. That means they are used, but in the R&D section, not in the commercial part. Commercial part, 12-inch diameters are used. So starting from 2-inch, it has come to 12-inch. Normally, the available things are 2-inch, then 3-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, and so on. Okay, so 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, and 18-inch also. And as you can see, as the diameter increases, the thickness of the wafer also increases. More or less, it is in the micrometer range, and the one having 12-inch diameter is having a thickness of 775 micrometer. That means 0.77 millimeter. So it is a bit thick. Actually, when the diameter increases, if you don't increase the thickness, the stability of the wafer will be a problem, because it is a fragile thing. It becomes too fragile to handle. So to handle a large wafer, a thickness also has to be increased. As you see, a 2-inch wafer is having a thickness of only 275 micrometer, but whenever you go to diameter of 12-inch, it's increase in the thickness to 775. That means increase of 500 micrometer has to be done so that you can handle the wafers. Okay. Now, let's say you have to buy a silicon wafer. Now, what are the specifications you will see for that? There are various specifications for buying a silicon wafer, but what you have to see is basically the type of the dopant. Normally, the available silicon wafers are undoped. That means a pure silicon wafer, which are called intrinsic silicon wafers. Apart from that, there are two types, P-type and N-type. Now, P-type are obviously doped with boron, and N-type are doped with phosphorus, antimony, arsenic, and so on. There are two standard orientations of the crystal. Obviously, since this is a single crystal, it will have a crystal orientation, and the standard orientations are 100 and 111. So if you try to search a silicon wafer, you will see that all in the specifications it will be written P type, N type, what type of dopant it has used, what is the orientation. And another thing that will also you have to check is the resistivity. Depending upon your application, you have to choose your resistivity. Obviously, the undoped one or the intrinsic silicon will have the highest resistivity. And if you have to use for a backgate, that means you are using a silicon which will also act having an electrode or metallic connection, then obviously its resistivity has to be very low. That means you have to have a high doping in that case. In that case, we say it is P++ type or N++ doping and so on. So resistivity also varies from 1 milliohm to 150 ohm and so on, or even in the kilo ohm range if it is a flat zone type of ingot production. So these things obviously you have to keep in mind while you are giving an order for a silicon wafer. And the surface is also a factor. Normally we use single site polished, but double site polished are also available. If someone try to make a device on both the sides, then one can go for a double site polished one. Obviously that is a bit costlier type of system, but it is available. But more commonly and popular one is a single site polished. And as-cut, that means without polished silicon wafers are also available, which are just used as a substrate, not for any fabrication over it. Okay, so these things you have to keep in mind. Now, also another thing, whenever you got a silicon wafer, let's say you have both N-type and P-type, you have both type of orientation, that means 100 and 111. Then you have to know, or you have to, you cannot see and understand a circular thing whether it is an N-type or a P-type, whether it is 100 or 111. That's why when the commercial products are available, they are made certain cuts on the edges where normally it is a primary cut, that is a cut with a longer dimension, and another secondary cut on the side of a silicon wafer, which is called a secondary cut. So two cuts are available. Now, depending upon the cut, you can understand what type of wafer it is. That means whether this is an N-type, whether this is a P-type, whether this is 100 or whether it is 111. Obviously, that can be easily understood. Now, as you see from the above one on the right hand corner, that is a P-type 111 wafer, where it is only having a single cut, which is a primary cut or a primary flat, you can also say. Normally, we say it is a primary cut. Whereas for a 100 P-type, you have a secondary cut, which is at a 90° with the primary one. Okay, so you can distinguish at least between two P-type looking at the cut whether it is 100 or 111. Again, you have a N-type silicon and you are having N-type with 111 orientation. In that case, the secondary cut makes an angle of 45 degree with the primary cut. And the 100 N-type on the other hand is just at the opposite end of the primary cut. That is, the secondary cut is at the opposite end. So obviously, let's say you are having all the 4 type. Only looking at the position of the 2 cuts, you can say whether it is a P-type, whether it is a N-type, whether it is 111 or it is 100 type of crystal or the wafer you are having. So this is only for the user's facility. These cards are introduced by the commercial industry in order to distinguish between the type of the wafers that you have purchased. Otherwise, everything will be mixed up if you don't keep it like that. Okay, so this is a important thing that people should know whenever they are using silicon wafers in their lab or so on. Okay. Now I will start with a very important part in the industry people, and not only for the industry people, also for those who will be working with silicon wafers in their own lab. Because silicon wafer cleaning is a very important aspect in any type of work, whether it is R&D, whether it is commercial, industrial application, whatever it is, this part is very important. That's why no lab can work without knowing how silicon wafers are cleaned. And that is a process, a very well-known process are there to clean a wafer. And the question is, what type of contaminations are there on silicon wafers? Actually, there can be various type of contamination on the silicon wafers. Obviously, one is the dust particles. Dust particles are available everywhere in our room, in the lab, in the industry, wherever. You cannot have a region without any dust particle. So obviously one will be a dust particle. Apart from that, organic materials like oil and other polymer type of materials are on the silicon wafers because of the processing, our handling, and so on. There will be some ions which will be adsorbed on the surface of the silicons. They can be adsorbed elements, adsorbed molecules, or even ions. Now, obviously, all these things will create a problem. Now, why it should create a problem? The question is, chemical contamination obviously can ruin the device performance, its reliability, and so on. And obviously, the dust particle contamination, or you can say particulate contamination, actually reduce the circuit yield and process repeatability. Can you don't know where the particle will sit in your device part. Obviously, you cannot repeat the process. So since this is a very random thing, that where your particle or the particulate will fall on your device or the device which you are processing with the silicon wafer. So always before using the silicon wafer in your lab, or obviously in the industry, you have to follow the procedure for cleaning it, and the cleaning has to be a rigorous one. So I will just I can skip this part. Actually, it tells that what type of defects occur if you have particle contamination. Like normally for particle contamination, that will create a pattern defect. It can have some implantation also that are normally ion implantation. Metallic contamination are of 2 types, alkali metals or heavy metals. In both the cases, there will be a degradation in the oxide or the film quality. Apart from that, there will be some chemical contamination like inorganic, organic, and oxide things. And these type of contamination also will create defects in the various aspects of your you can say the reliability and characteristics of your device. I will not go into details. You can just see. If I read, that will be boring and it is not important also at this time. Okay. Now, what I will actually show you, what are the different process that are involved in cleaning the wafers. Obviously, you have to first clean the particles uh, that are sitting over your wafer. You also have some metallic contamination or organic contamination. So you have to clean them. Now, particle contaminations are normally removed by ultrasonic agitation, and major part of the particles can be removed by this process. Organic contaminations are normally removed by oxygen plasma, or more or less or more commonly by Piranha's solution, which I will discuss now. And then comes the RCA clean. It is also used to remove the metal contamination and some of the remaining organic contamination that still exists even after Pirhana cleaning. Okay. So there are different standard cleaning process like Piranha cleaning, as I have told. There is RCA cleaning, Megasonic cleaning, and ozone cleaning procedures. I will mostly focus on the first two, and I will just show you what the Megasonic cleaning and ozone cleaning is. But I will mainly focus on the first two cleaning process. Now, in every lab, obviously in the industry and in any other lab who work with silicon, obviously they have to do the silicon cleaning and all the processing, and they use what is called DI water. Now, what is a DI water? DI water means actually deionized water, where you have removed the ions from the water. And DI water so that you can prevent silicon from ion contamination, because you know that water has various contaminant or ions in it, and that may cause ion contamination in your wafer. Obviously, as I have shown earlier in the contaminants, ionic contamination is also a one aspect what has to be removed. So if you use your processing chemical or water which already contains ions, then obviously you cannot remove it, but you will actually implant it. So always you have to use deionized water, not distilled water or just a filtered water. Now, whenever you have a deionized water, let's say you have purchased deionized water from somewhere, you will see whether it is deionized or not, it will be specified by its resistivity. And the quality of the deionized water in terms of resistivity, if you see, it will be 18 megohm centimeter. It is the resistivity of a deionized water. Now, how it comes out, if you see, normally, obviously, water has two ions, H plus and OH minus. And from the diffusivity, one can, okay, this thing has moved a bit. Actually, from diffusivity values of H plus and OH minus, one can obtain the mobility using Einstein's equation. Einstein's relation actually relates the diffusivity with the mobility of the ions. So one can achieve the mobility from the diffusivity from this equation, where mu represents the mobility and capital D represents the diffusivity. So QD by KT actually is the mobility of the ions. So you can achieve, or you can calculate the mobility of both H plus and OH minus ions, and from there, if you use the formula below, you can find out the resistivity, and it will comes out to be 18.2 or approximately 18 megohm centimeter. So whenever you purchase one bottle of DI water, you will see the specification written on it will be 18 megohm centimeter. So that will ensure that, okay, this DI water is of good quality. Normally, every fab lab, or even in some laboratories in in various departments of institutes or universities also have DI water plant. Actually, it is always difficult to purchase bottles of DI water, as you have to use your whole processing and cleaning of the silicon wafers with DI water. So you need it regularly. So it's better to purchase one plant which looks like this, and it do the deionization of your water which you obtain from your tap one, pass through filters, and then feed into a ion exchanger. So in the ion exchanger, actually you deionize this, and after that you receive the deionized water which you will use. So this is the schematic which shows how the ion exchanger works. Normally we have mm, various type of ions like copper, calcium, magnesium, and so on. Now these ions can be easily exchanged in the ion exchanger and pure deionized without, that means most of the ions can be removed by this process, and what you achieve is more or less devoid of the ions. And these things you have to use whenever you use or work with silicon wafers. You actually have to use this one for your processing and the cleaning purpose. Okay, so I start with the Piranha cleaning. This is a very popular process to remove the organic materials on your silicon wafer. Now Piranha actually refers to the mixture. It is the chemical mixture of sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide. This mixture is called Piranha, and this is a boiling mixture. That means when you mix and boil it, it creates a solution which is called Piranha, and the process is also named after this solution. And the ratio and the temperature can be tuned depending upon your application. Obviously there are certain common values for this. You cannot use upon yours because a lot of research has been done over this cleaning, and there is no use for you to now do a new research to achieve your own ratio and temperature. There are well-known ratios which are actually patented and published everywhere, which you can use for yourself, and no one nowadays used to play with that. So the ratio mainly is 3 parts of sulfuric acid and 1 parts of hydrogen peroxide. The main you can say the most common protocol is this one, but apart from that 4:1 to 7:1 are also used. That means you can understand that obviously the percentage of sulfuric acid will be more compared to the hydrogen peroxide, and this will create a strong oxidizing mixture, and that will actually help you to remove the mainly the organic material, and also some of the particle contaminations which still exist even after ultrasonic cleaning. Okay, so as I have told, you have to use you can say highly concentrated sulfuric acid, nearly 98% of sulfuric acid, and 38% of H2O2, that means hydrogen peroxide. Volume ratios are typically 3:1, and even you can go for 7:1, but normally it's better to start with 3:1, not go for 4:1. Temperature around 100 to 130, and time mostly 10 minutes to 15 minutes. This can destroy the contamination, that means the organic contamination. And the mechanism of doing this, that means removal of your organic residue, actually followed 2 distinct steps. In the first process, you what you do is hydration. That means you remove hydrogen oxygen from your organic material as water. That means obviously in your organic material you have H plus and O2 minus ions or OH minus ions and all those things, and you can remove, or basically in the first process this removes those as water, and this hydration or dehydration actually creates a rapid carbonization. What do you mean by carbonization? Carbonization means formation of carbon by a complex method from organic material. So this carbonization process occurs while you are removing the water from your organic material, where this equation will show that whenever this sulfuric acid, the concentrated sulfuric acid is mixed with H2O2, it forms a Carrot's acid, and water are formed, and water is formed also from the organic materials, where H and O, basically H plus and OH minus, are removed from the organic structure, and water are removed, and carbonizations are carbonization process occurs because of this dehydration process. So this is basically the first step. First step is very not only first, but it's also a fast. It is not only first process but also a fast process, where this carbonization takes place very quickly, because your concentration of H2O2 is very high. Okay, then comes the second process, where actually you are creating a strong oxidizing agent from a mild oxidizing agent like H2O2. H2O2, or the peroxide, as all of us know, that is a mild oxidizing agent. But uh, this second process, where your sulfur acid uh, helps in conversion of H2O2 into hydronium ions, which is H3O plus, and atomic oxygen. Okay, this atomic oxygen actually plays the main role. Atomic oxygen is highly reactive, and this actually dissolves your carbon. So you can see the figure or the schematic below, how you have an atomic oxygen here, and this atomic oxygen is playing the major role in reducing the or basically creating a reaction with the carbon part or the carbon ligands, and then it causes a removal of the carbon, because it creates 2C, that means a pure carbon material, and that will be washed out. Actually, that will be washed out. So all the carbon bonds, it will destroy the carbon bond, while it reacts with this atomic oxygen because of the oxidation, strong oxidation, and it will give rise to pure carbon material, and that carbon material will be dissolved and washed out after this process. So actually this is a two-step process. If you again see those, first it is a carbonization process, where you create some carbon ligands from the organic material, and the H and O are removed from this organic material in forms of water. In the second process, the acid actually reduce or react with the peroxide and creates atomic oxygen, which is very reactive and highly oxidizing agent, that actually creates material or elemental carbon, which can be dissolved easily by the Pirhana solution and then washed out. So in this process, actually the organic part or the organic contamination on a silicon wafer can be removed. And this mixture is very corrosive. So whenever you have to handle this type of mixture, you have to very aware of this. It is not that very easily you can handle those. You have to follow some procedure during this thing. One is that you have to have a proper bench of handling this one. You have to have quartz tanks. Even if you use beakers, you have to use quartz beaker, not normal glass, because that is a create a temperature, while actually that will create an exothermic reaction when H2SO4 and H2O2 are mixed up. And even normal glass will have different ions, which will also create some contamination in your silicon wafer. So that things you have to keep in mind. Also, you have to use proper gloves, proper dress while handling those. So you cannot be very reluctant while doing this cleaning. So you have to proceed uh, good proper procedure and be attentive while doing these things, because these chemicals are not very good for handling easily. So this you have to take care of, and then you have to do those. Now, if we see the operational part, what I have told earlier is the mechanics or the mechanical or mechanism of removing the organic material or the organic contamination from silicon wafer. Now, if you have to follow that procedure, the procedure will be that peroxide has to be added to the acid very slowly, because as soon as you add the peroxide, it will produce an exothermic reaction. So you should not add it much before you want to clean it. So just immediately before you want to clean the organic material from the silicon wafer, you will add it, but you should add it very slowly. Otherwise, there can be a burst. Then after adding this, the substrate has to be rinsed with DI water and dry it. And then you have to place it in the piranha bath. That is the one I have shown earlier. Then you have to place them in a piranha bath. Then put your sample in the HN. That means the piranha solution that you have prepared. You will obviously keep the HN for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then transfer it again to the DI water beaker or the bucket where you have the DI water. So actually, before doing the cleaning, you have to prepare all those things. That means in a beaker or a bucket, you have to first keep one DI water in a one bucket, then again put the HN in another bucket, then again another 2 buckets will be filled with 2 DI waters. That means 2 buckets filled with DI waters. That means initially you have to put your wafer, rinse it in the DI water, dry it, then put in the next bucket where you have the etchant or the piranha solution, keep it there for 10 to 15 minutes, remove it, transfer it to the second and or the third beaker containing the DI water, rinse it for 5 minutes, then transfer it to the fourth beaker or the bucket where you again have another beaker with DI water, then again rinse it, and then finally dry them with nitrogen gun or other dryer, whatever it. So this is the whole procedure you have to follow. Next, we go to the another important part. That means, as we have shown in one of the slide, that you have to do the ultrasonic cleaning initially to remove the particulates. Then you have to do the organic removal by piranha solution. Then you have to proceed for the RCA cleaning, which actually removes the metallic contamination as well as some of the organic residue which still remains. Now, this was developed in 1960 in Radio Corporation of America, and the RCA clean procedure is named after this one. That means Radio Corporation of America. That's why the name RCA. Now, this RCA cleaning actually follows two steps. One is the step 1, which is standard clean 1, and next is standard clean 2. In standard clean 1, which is SCA 1, obviously you have a mixture of DI water, hydrogen peroxide, and ammonium hydroxide. And in standard clean 2, or that is SC2, you have a solution of DI water, hydrogen peroxide, and hydrochloric acid. So in both the cases, the common thing is DI water and hydrogen peroxide, but in the first one you have ammonium hydroxide, and in the next one you have the acid, which is hydrochloric acid, and they are mixed in a particular proportion, and the process temperature is more or less the same, and the process time are also more or less the same. Now, if I start with the SCA1 process, this actually removes some of the metallic contamination, and here the ammonium hydroxide, peroxide, and the water is mixed in the proportion of 1:1:5, or it can be in a proportion of 1:2:7. You have to keep in mind that pH will be high. The oxidized organic contamination like from CO2, H2O, it basically it oxidizes the organic contamination and forms this carbon dioxide and H2O and removes those. It also form complex such as copper ammoniate with the metals. It actually reacts with these metals and form the complex ions, and it can remove those, and it can slowly dissolve the native oxide and grow back new oxide which removes particles on the oxide. That means actually it can remove the particles, as I have told earlier also, that every silicon wafer has a native oxide. That means silicon uh, on the surface, when you cut the silicon on the surface, there will be some free bonds, and oxygen from the atmosphere will make a native oxide of 3 to 4 nanometer, which is always there on the silicon wafers. So while this RCA1 cleaning process is done, these native oxides are dissolved. And while this is dissolved, the particles on these oxides are also dissolved. And again, new oxides will be formed, which will be clean enough. Also, it will create some complex with the metals, and that complex ions and the complex molecules can be removed by washing. Also, it can oxidize the organic contamination to create carbon dioxide and water, which also can be removed during this washing procedure or the cleaning procedure. But there is a problem in using this ammonium hydroxide because this can etch silicon, and though it will not etch very roughly, but some part of the silicon surface will be etched during this process, and that's why it can make a slight roughness or create slight roughness on the surface. That's why today sometimes the industry avoid this one. Now in the second cleaning process, the remaining trace of the metallic ions uh, are removed, where HCl, H2O2 and H2O, that means the DI water, is mixed in a proportion of 1:1:6, and that are heated in 70-degree mostly and kept in 10 minutes. This removes the alkali ions and the cations like aluminum, iron, and magnesium ions, and forms hydroxides in the basic solution like SC1 and remove them. And in SC2, it completely removes the metallic contamination, such as if you have gold on it, uh, it cannot be removed from SC1 step, and this type of metals which cannot be removed from SC1 can be removed in this SC2 step. So in SC1 you can remove some of the metallic ions, but still some may remain that can be finally removed by this SC2 cleaning process. So obviously this also needs a separate bench where you have to keep buckets or beakers inside this fume hood in a separate region, and in each of the bucket you have to mix the chemicals in a desired proportion, keep them ready before you start the work. And obviously, as I have earlier told, all this process is very dangerous to handle, so you have to keep the safety things in mind. Must wear apron and face shield, and gloves obviously. So this is basically the whole process. So you have to first turn on the heater uh, using the temperature controller in the cleaning bench, keep it at 70-degree. You should handle the wafers in the cassette. Actually, what you see, these are called wafer cassettes. In these cassettes, you can place your silicon wafers in parallel so that they doesn't touch each other. You don't have to put your hand on tweezer over these wafers because it is not desirable to hand a wafer even with a tweezer, because that also creates some damage. So place the uh, wafers inside the cassette and dip them inside the bath. Then obviously keep your cassettes for your desired time inside the baths, and then remove them, uh, place it inside the DI water and the ultrasonic bath for cleaning the chemical what you have used. Again, repeat the procedure SC2, and then finally after the all the cleaning procedure with the DI water, you have to again spin it dry. So this is the whole process. So as I have discussed earlier, that Piranha, you have to follow some process. For RCA clean also, you have to follow this process. So initially you will start with the ultrasonic cleaning, then Piranha cleaning, then RCA cleaning, and then finally you have to dry, and you can use it for the final thing. And during your final application, that means where you have to pattern your silicon substrate, if you don't need the oxide layer over it, that means, as I have told, that normally you have a native oxide over the silicon, you can, or you have to basically remove that oxide from the wafer just before uh, putting your wafer inside your chamber. That means the processing chamber. So you have to uh, clean the wafer for removing the oxide over it using HF, which is hydrofluoric acid, or you can use some buffer solution, which is combination of NH4 and HF. Okay, so this is the process where your oxide will be removed, and the free bonds of the silicon, which was initially bonded with oxygen, will now be passivated with hydrogen, so that no more oxygen can sit on this bond and create again an oxide layer. So this actually removes the oxide or the native oxide from the top layer, and also creates a passivation. That means it uh, actually helps the wafer to become inert in the atmosphere, so that no more oxide can be grown over this one. Okay, so this is the whole procedure as I have just talked with you. You can see the whole procedure, that initially you have to follow the Piranha cleaning, obviously ultrasonic, then the Piranha, then the RCA1, RCA2, and in the mean process, all the process steps, you have to rinse the wafers with DI water for as long as you can. Obviously each of the process should follow the DI water cleaning. Okay, so this is the whole thing for the RCA cleaning part. And ultrasonic cleaning is also very important. It actually done in the ultrasonic cleaning, what happens, uh, you are using a high frequency vibrator where you are placing your bath uh, with your silicon wafers inside. Normally the frequency range is 20 to 45 kilohertz, and that creates basically bubbles inside, and these bubbles will acts like a scrubber on the surface of the uh, silicon wafers, and this scrubber will remove the particulates from that. Higher frequency, like above 45 kilohertz, will create small bubbles, and that are less effective. But again, megasonic, that means very high frequency vibrators, are again seen to be much effective for the particle contamination removal. And now I will show you a small video which shows how a cleaning RCA cleaning process is done. So this is basically a clean bench, which is a RCA clean bench. So for the step 1, you can see the bottle contains the mixture of H2O2, ammonium hydroxide, and H2S4. So DI water, H2O2, and ammonium hydroxide are mixed in this bottle, so that it is ready for use. And you can see that the person who is working is fully equipped with gloves and aprons, and I think he may or may have the face shield also. And the whole bench is Teflon made. Either it has to be, uh, it should be actually Teflon made, because this creates exothermic reaction, and you cannot use a normal glass bottle or even a glass beaker or a glass bucket for this one. So both the tanks, one with the SC1 solution, another with SC2 solutions, were uh, covered up with the desired solution. Now you can see the person is working with the silicon wafers, and he actually transferred the silicon wafers from one cassette to the other. That this is what is called the cassette. You can have the parallel cassette, and he never put his hand or even a tweezer to transfer those. Now he is dipping it in the first solution. And the time is obviously for 10 minutes. Now he is removing the cassette with the cassette carrier. This is called the cassette carrier. And now he will dip it inside the DI water. So he will rinse it in the DI water for more or less 3 minutes. Now again he is rinsing it for HF for 30 seconds, so that the top oxide layer is removed. And then in the DI water for again 3 minutes. So next comes the second process, that is SC2. In SC2 again, he is putting the wafers, and he will keep it for 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes again. So now rinsing again in DI water. Again HF, because in both the S1, SC1 and SC2 process, again some oxides will be formed over that. So you may need to remove those. You may need to remove those. And also this process will, as I have told, that will also remove some of the particles, smaller on the, which was adsorbed on the oxide layers. So after all the cleaning, he has to dry it. So this is a dryer where you can insert the cassette, and it will rotate and it will dry like a washing machine. So now your silicon wafers are ready for use. Okay. Okay. Devashish, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Huh. So you can now provide them the question.
I already provided just few minutes back.
Okay, okay. So should I proceed, or they will answer and then I will proceed?
You have how long you need, sir?
It will not take much time now.
Okay. Okay, just proceed, please proceed. We are learning late. Please proceed. In the meantime, they will continue. and during discussion they also can continue.
Okay. Okay, so what we have discussed till now is basically wet cleaning. Apart from wet cleaning, there is also dry cleaning procedure, and that is mainly by plasma or ion beam. And in this, there are various type of dry cleaning procedures. One with HFH2 vapor, then ozone, then hydrogen argon plasma, and obviously thermal. So there are various type of cleaning process also, but mostly or most popular ones that I have shown earlier. Apart from that, if someone wants, someone can do the dry cleaning also. I will just show one dry cleaning, which is basically the ozone cleaning, which is UV ozone cleaning. Now you can see the picture of the ozone cleaner or the system which is shown. Image of the system is shown here. You can see the schematic also. Normally, previously, mercury vapor lamps are used. Nowadays, excimer systems has taken place of that. Now, in mercury vapor lamp, oxygen are dissociated and creates ozone. That means ozones are generated, and then these ozone actually cause the wafer for a cleaning purpose. Now, this laser or the mercury vapor lamp is mainly used to create the ozone from the oxygen molecules from the atmosphere around, and that actually forms the ozone part, which will be generated during this process, and this will actually form a plasma inside this chamber, and this ozone will irradiate the silicon surface and remove the contaminants from the surface by oxidation process. So this is one of the process which is used in the dry clean, and I will not proceed with the cleaning procedure. More or less, there are other dry cleaning process like thermal process and so on. So till this, I ends with the cleaning process, and I will just tell you about other important aspects of your IC industries that one should know. One is the oxidation process. That is very important whenever one use various techniques to do form oxides on the silicon. That means you are removing oxides, but
Kostubda, your voice is not coming. I think sir is disconnected. Please, in the meantime, if you could please give your test. Already link already shared.
sorry again for that problem. Can you hear now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So there is a dry oxidation process, as I was telling that here the pure oxygen is passed through you can say a furnace type of chamber, where you are placing your silicon, and these oxygen molecules actually diffuse through the existing oxide layer and create the silicon oxide on your surface. And this is basically a schematic which shows how the chamber looks like. It has a processing tube where the oxygen and some of the carrier gases are inside through the MFCs. MFCs means mass flow controller. That means you have to control the flow rate of your carrier gas and the oxide layers, and the temperature of the system also has to be controlled. It looks like this. Okay. So before oxidation, you have this structure, and after oxidation, you can see some of the silicon is consumed from the oxide, and a top layer also is produced on the silicon. That means 55% of the new layer has been formed, and 45% of the silicon has been consumed during this process. Apart from dry oxidation, there is a wet oxidation process also, where you are using basically water vapors. And here the water vapors can actually dissociate and can diffuse inside the silicon wafers. And water is placed in a bubbler which is heated, and nitrogen is flowed as a carrier gas, and it is passed through the processing tube. And during this process, obviously the processing tube is having some temperature to perform this diffusion process. And you can see the graph where you can see that the graph shows with time how the oxide thickness in both dry and wet oxidation occurs. And it is very clear that wet oxygen is a much faster process, because in wet oxidation you are getting more thickness at a much lower time compared to the dry oxidation. Apart from oxidation, there is a doping. There are two basic diffusion process called diffusion and ion implantation. Diffusion, there is a net transport of molecules from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration, which is the basic concept of diffusion. And in ion implantation, basically charged ions are accelerated towards the irradiated portion of the wafers, and that creates your doping. So this is how the doping occurs in diffusion. It can fill the empty space. You can move, it can, the element can move in between the atoms, or the dopant can exchange with the silicon atoms. In the ion implantation, normally, since the silicons are arranged in regular manner, they form channels. That's why if you bombard the wafer with ions, with a beam which is perpendicular to the wafer, the probability that the dopant will move parallel to the silicon atoms and will cause deep ion implantation, which is not desired. So that's why the wafers are placed at an angle of more or less 7 degree to 10 degree, so that the dopant will actually hit some of the shallow silicon atoms and then get scattered inside and form the doping on the surface, or you can say near the surface of the silicon wafers, and not form a deep ion implantation. So this should be kept in mind while ion implantation, that ion implantation, during ion implantation, the wafer has to be tilted a bit. So these are the following things that ion implantation should have. That means the source, the separator, the lens, and so on. I'll not go into details, and the schematic look like this. So I stop here because otherwise the time will run out if I have to talk much. And thank you for your kind attention. Okay. So if you have any queries, you can ask me.
Sir, good morning, sir. That was a nice session from you, sir. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you please
Hello?
introduce, please.
Sir, it is Vikram Teja, working as an assistant professor of nanoelectronics lab in Sri Vidyaniketa Engineering College, Tirupati, sir. Sir, actually, as you have been using different kinds of cleaning process, we have been using some of the cleaning process, like, with the soap solution, or also cleaning by acetone. is this the correct way, whether we can able to clean the wafer, silicon wafer by this process, sir?
If you tell me as an expert, I will say obviously no.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, sir. But we cannot able to identify the.
Now, I am not sure whether all these things are available, but I think at least the chemicals what I have told you are available in the market. If you can purchase those, you can obviously follow the process, because all the things you need, obviously every lab cannot have a working bench. That is
Yes, sir.
not possible, but at
Yeah.
least you can purchase Teflon beakers or quartz beakers,
Yes,
and
sir.
then a good gloves to handle, and a hot plate. Even because you are need to create 70-degree only, so hot
Yeah.
plate will be enough for that. And
Yes.
if you at least buy these chemicals, and if you don't have a DI water plant, uh, you can purchase those, or at least use a good pure water. Obviously,
Yes.
I will always tell to or prefer to use DI water. I will not tell that you use in normal water, but
Yes, sir.
if it is not available, then I cannot say that. But
Yes.
you can purchase those and follow that. Soap solution and all those things is good to clean our utensils, but for the purpose of your research, it may not be good enough.
So maybe
May not
make
be
it
good
dirty,
enough.
more dirty, I think.
Yes, yes.
Gives more
Yes.
contamination, I think.
Actually, if you clean your things with soap solution and then with acetone,
Yes.
then also you have to follow this solution. Well, that means cleaning procedure. That means cleaning procedure that I have told you will be the ultimate one.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And
Soap
also
solution cleaning is only for your, you can say your mind purpose, that, okay, we know that soap cleans our hand and utensils at our homes, but not for the silicon wafers or even the anything in the lab, because that chemical is corrosive.
Yes, yes, yes. So and one more thing, sir, how can we cut the silicon wafer as we required for thermal vacuum deposition, sir? So because if I require some,
Can you repeat again? I cannot hear that.
how can we able to cut the silicon wafer as we require the quantity to be doped for different kinds of materials?
Okay. This is a very good question. Actually, obviously, we also in our lab, we never used a full silicon because that becomes very costly for us.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
And also our processing instruments are not very large where you can grow all those things in a very large system. So
Yes.
we have to cut those. Normally, it is always better to have a dicer or a wire cutter. But again, the question is, every lab cannot have a wire cutter or a dicer. Even a good tweezer can help you.
Okay.
Okay, a good tweezer or just a diamond cutter. You have a diamond cutter?
Yes, sir, yes, sir, it was there, sir.
Okay.
But we
That
cannot
diamond
be able
cutter
to
will
get
help
some
you.
alignments, sir.
Yes, but again, while cutting, you have to keep in mind that your axis or the crystallographic axis has to be kept in mind while cutting. That
Yes,
means, as I've shown in one of the figure, that the silicon has a orientation. Now, if
yes,
you try to cut in an off axis, then what will happen? The whole silicon wafer will break into irregular size and irregular pieces. So that is not desirable. So best way to cut is to cut along the or perpendicular to the primary cut. You can see this wafer has a primary cut. Now, if you cut perpendicular to it, you will cut it into two halves initially and then start cutting parallel to it, and you will have some slots like that, which will be very easy to cut. That means if you just press it with a tweezer or a diamond cutter on the two ends, you will see that it will cut automatically. You don't have to do any scratching also.
yeah,
So
yes,
that's
sir.
a good question, because you have to cut it.
Yes, sir, yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the great, wonderful session, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for your attention also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any more question?
Well, if we are running also late, 15 minutes late almost. If you have any question, yes, sir will be available next talk, maybe tomorrow, I think. Yeah. So that time you can ask us. Okay, it's not a big deal. So I already shared the feedback, and I also like to thank Dr. Das for his valuable time. And I believe all of you enjoyed his talk, because this is the basic things we like to provide in the that is our motto actually. So that's why I like to thank once again Dr. Das